Good afternoon, my heathens. This is my recorded review for those of you that want to retake the industry and services test. A couple of scores are not probably what we want. And this was the easiest way and the fastest way to get this done because otherwise we were going to have to wait a couple of weeks because I got a whole bunch of other reviewing to do and retesting. So if you are in the position that you want to retake the test this Friday, so this would be the end of this week in Panther Den, listen up because I'm going to give you the big things that you need to know in order to take this test. So are you ready? Good. You need to know the origins of the Industrial Revolution. So, where did it start? What things kind of triggered it? Um, so you could say pretty safely that the Industrial Revolution starts in Great Britain, in northern England, and it's triggered largely because of the development of the steam engine, which will later go into things like railroads and stuff. But originally it was just a pumping device. But they quickly figured out that if it's just kind of a repetitive thing, that you could use this to manufacture stuff as well and to build trains and stuff like that. So the origins of our factory system, the modern factory system, kind of comes out from there, and then the technology spreads to other regions into Northern Europe, Germany and France, the Dutch. It spreads into the United States and so forth. So, really, that's where the Industrial Revolution gets kicked off. And the primary trigger is going to be that steam engine development. That's going to lead us into heavy industry because not only are you building trains and railroads and stuff like that, but it's also going to power up the textile industry. And so there's a whole bunch of textile mills that get founded in northern England as well. And that's really what kickstarts everything is the development of railroad and the construction of railroad stuff and this textile industry. So that's really where it gets going. And often we still see the same process in newly developing countries too, that they'll often start in something like textiles or steel production or heavy equipment production. That seems to be where we go. And then later on, we start making consumer goods, like washing machines or whatever else. But it generally starts off in heavy industry like that. One of the other reasons why we see it kick off where it does in Europe and in North America, for instance, is the presence of iron ore and coal. Because those are the two things you really need for steel production. And it's going to be really hard to have a big steel producing industry without those two things. England had it. The United States had it in the Ohio Valley, Pennsylvania region. We had plenty of coal and iron ore. Russia will eventually have a lot of this to make their heavy industries. France and Germany have the Ruhr Valley, which also has a lot of coal and a lot of iron ore. So a lot of your very early industrial regions are going to focus there because they have the raw materials available right there to make the steel to then make all the products that you need to make steel out of. Another thing that you're going to need to know is the Weber model. Think about all the stuff that goes into the Weber model when you're trying to figure out where to put a factory. You got to figure in land costs, labor cost. Do you have access to capital, for instance? Energy costs. All these cost factors have to be figured in order to find the location that is best suited for whatever factory it is that you're trying to build. And so these are the things you need to think about as a factory owner operator. Do you need to be where the markets are? Do you need to be where your raw materials come in from? Do you need to be where transport is? There's a lot of factors when you look at the Weber model. So look at the stuff that you had to do on the project, for instance, that are included in that. And those are going to be key features of the Weber model of placement of industrial production. So keep that in mind. Bulk gaining and reducing, you need to know that. As you would put a factory somewhere, do you need to be closer to the raw materials or do you need to be closer to the market? Is it a bulk gaining industry or is it a bulk reducing industry? This is one of the things you have to figure out in Weber. And so if you're looking at something like the steel industry making steel products, you probably want to be closer to the raw materials because you're going to be hauling an enormous amount of energy in the form of coal, probably, and an enormous amount of iron ore and other metals to make your steel. But a lot of that is going to go to waste in the process. And so what's coming into the factory is a whole lot more than what's leaving the factory. So, on a sense of cost, you would want to be closer to where those raw materials are coming in from. And that would apply to any business. When you're trying to locate that factory, should it be closer to where the parts and raw materials are coming in from, or do you need to be closer to where your market is? When you look at cars, for instance, cars tend to get bigger. I mean, you have a whole bunch of parts, and when you strap them all together, you end up with a bigger thing. And so you would want to be close to where those markets are to distribute your cars. And if you're looking at like the United States, most of the United States population is sitting on the East Coast. So it shouldn't be that surprising that a lot of the car manufacturing plants in the United States are located pretty close to the eastern seaboard. They're also trying to take advantage of other things, where transportation is, where a lot of the raw materials originally came in from. And so that may explain why you have this cluster from about Michigan on down to, let's say, northern Alabama in Mississippi, where a lot of our automotive stuff is made. So consider bulk gaining, bulk reducing. One of the big bulk gaining things is things like beer and potato chips. It probably is not as many railroad cars full of potatoes coming into a potato chip factory as is going out the other end. Because you're going to chop up your potatoes, you've got to fry them, you are going to stick them in a bag, and we all know that every potato chip bag only has 56 chips at the bottom, and 2/3 of it's just air. Okay, well, when you're shipping all that out, that's taking up more bulk space than the initial potatoes coming in to make the potato chips. So this would be another bulk gaining industry. And so you would want to locate your potato chip factory probably where the markets are for people eating potato chips. So stuff like that. Think about single market industries where you produce something that is really only used in large quantities by maybe one or two or three customers. And so you would want to locate pretty close to wherever those guys are. If I was a company selling silicon chips and stuff, I probably would want to locate to where computers are manufactured. In order to be able to serve my customers very, very well, because I've only got a couple of them to keep happy. It's going to cut down on transportation costs and so forth. So think again about the automotive industry. We have a lot of car factories in the Ohio Valley and states like Tennessee and Kentucky and stuff like that. So if I sell brakes or headlights or radios for cars or those stupid, the seat belts that never go back into the little thing when you take them off. I'm going to want to be near where the car manufacturers are because those are probably where I'm going to sell most of my stuff. And it just makes sense to locate somewhere where I can serve all of them about equally. So if they have factories here, here, and here, that I might want to have a factory that is relatively close to all three. So that is the idea of single market factories and how they would take advantage of having so few clients to locate their factories. Where would they want to be in relation to where all these other factories are? Break of bulk points. This has to do with transportation. They are sometimes called break of bulk nodes as well. You might see that. This is where you switch your transportation type. So are you going from a boat to a train? Are you going from a train to a truck? Are you going from a truck to a llama? Whatever it is, if you're changing the mode of transportation at any point you're doing that, you have a break of bulk point. And that means that your cargoes, your stuff, is changing however it's moving. And this is an important feature today because of my, again, fascination with cargo containers. Since our cargo containers have become a standardized thing, that means that manufactured parts and goods can move all over the world inside those boxes and can easily move from ship to truck to train, because all of them are made to fit those things. And so, since we standardized the size of the cargo containers, it makes it very easy at these break bulk points to shift from one transport to another. In the old days, if it came off of a boat, you had to unload the boat, you had to redo all the boxes and stuff to fit it into a rail car, and then heaven forbid it had to come off the rail car onto a truck because you're doing the whole same thing again. It's costly, it's time consuming, and it's not very efficient. What we have today is an efficient system. And that is the reason why you can buy products from all over the world relatively inexpensively. Without that, our world wouldn't work the way it does. So keep that in mind. Fordist and post-Fordist industry. Fordist is what we refer to as the moving assembly line, and that's usually what people think of when they think of factories. Is you got the product that's moving down this assembly line, and you have people adding stuff to it and strapping stuff onto it, and tightening up this nut and bolt or whatever. That is the Ford model. That is what Ford Motor Company got started. It is the reason why that their cars were cheaper, because cars got cheaper using mass assembly work like this. But it's a system that does have some flaws because it is very repetitive work. Every person on that assembly line has one job, and it's probably a pretty boring one. And so it is a tedious job to have, which means you probably have to pay a whole lot of people a lot of money to do it, because who wants to stand around and put 4 bolts on something, the 7 days. I'm sorry. We have unions now. We have 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, doing the exact same job over and over and over again. So there is some flaws. It is often a top-down system where the engineers and ownership are telling the people in the factory, this is how you're going to do stuff. And there's a flaw to that because they may not actually know the best way to do something, whereas somebody that has to work on this piece of machinery every day knows that there's an easier way to do this. And so maybe those voices aren't listened to. Which brings me to, union versus right to work. In union states, the workers in a factory, let's say, can come together, form a union, and collectively bargain with the management of the company on things like benefits and pay and days off and stuff like that. And in that case, because you have a whole group of people doing this simultaneously as a collective, that means that if management doesn't meet your goals, then maybe you decide not to come to work. And that means the factory gets to shut down and not make anything. And so it is a risk that management runs by not negotiating with their labor force that way. Right to work means that there's a lot of laws in that state government which make it very, very difficult to organize unions, to maybe prevent unions from being able to go on strike, for instance. It really limits the ability of the unions to use the powers that they have. So right to work states are generally fairly friendly to management or ownership. And one of the ways that that shows up is that in right to work states, often the pay is much or significantly lower than it is in a unionized state. So Texas is a right to work state, and therefore our labor pay may not be quite what it is in other states. We workers in this state may not get the kind of benefits that maybe workers who do the exact same job in some other state in a unionized state would get, because there's no mechanism for them to negotiate this sort of stuff. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about labor costs, for instance, looking at where you might want to locate a factory. Would it be a unionized state where you have a lot of skilled labor, let's say, as opposed to a right to work state where maybe the cost of the labor is cheaper? So something to consider. Just in time, GT. Sorry. Oh, man. It has been a long day. Just in time, GIT, you might see it sometimes that way, GIT, just in time, means that we have created a system of supply in both services and industry where either parts in industry or the finished goods in a service sector are arriving just at the time that consumers or the industry needs them. It used to be that as a business, you would want to have a whole lot of backstock of stuff and to restock your shelves with. That you didn't want to run out of stuff because you can't sell what's not there. And so you would have an excess of inventory of parts or things, let's say cans of beans, at a grocery store. You would keep those in the back, and periodically somebody would check and see what's left on the shelf. And then when it was coming pretty low, you'd go back into the back and go bring out whatever it is that you need. And that's how services and industry worked for 100 years or so. Things began to change when we began to introduce telecommunications and computer services into industry and, let's say, retail sales, where it is no longer necessary to keep that backlog and backstock of stuff to make sure that you don't run out on the shelf. That we can computer do all of this stuff now. And actually, the computer is probably doing all the ordering and stuff. It's not humans anymore. And so when Kroger is running low on this location of refried beans, the computer is going to place an order with whatever bean company that we need another 3 skids of refried beans. And so the idea is by the time that order arrives and by the time it gets shipped out and is heading to the Kroger's, it'll arrive about the same time that they're down to their last couple of cans of beans. And so all you have to do is put on the new stuff, and that's now in the inventory of the Kroger's, and it has arrived just in time. Industry works the same way. If you don't need to have thousands of spare parts of things in order to manufacture whatever it is, all you need is what you need for today or this week, let's say, because all of that can be ordered by a computer. And arrive just in time for you to be able to use it on the manufacturing floor. Now, that is the joy of just in time. It saves companies a lot of money because they're not having to buy a bunch of inventory of stuff ahead of time in order to make sure that they don't run out. And it means that you don't have to devote a lot of space to it either. You don't need to have a back warehouse anymore to run a business or some sort of manufacturing plant. It'll all arrive just in time, presuming everything works right. Let's just say that sometimes there are things called typhoons, and the stuff that you ordered from China, which is supposed to arrive 6 weeks later, is now sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. That could be a problem. If there is a rail strike and the trains aren't moving for whatever reason, that could mess this whole system up. The COVID virus has made a mess out of just in time because you have a whole different problem of trying to get this stuff through a transport system when you're short workers to make all this stuff happen. So just in time relies on computers that are working and a transportation system that is reliable enough to get things on specific dates. And if anything goes wrong with either one of those things, then just in time becomes a real nightmare because suddenly you're not getting the parts that you need. You're not getting the toilet paper that you ordered at Kroger's, and suddenly there's no toilet paper. And now everybody's losing their minds because there's no toilet paper. So you're probably losing sales at this point because you're either not manufacturing what it is you need to manufacture, or you are not selling on the store shelves what it was that you should be selling, like beans and toilet paper. All right. Think about, this is another thing you may see, is services and what kinds of services there are. We have consumer services, which is stuff that they're selling to you and me. This could be the grocery store. This could be a Subway sandwich shop. This could be your family doctor, your dentist, your family lawyer, whatever. They are offering you goods and services directly to you as a person. That is consumer sales. That is retail sales. You might hear it as retail. This would be like going to the shopping mall and looking at all the shops and buying things at a shoe store there or something. That is consumer or retail services. They're selling you services, or they're selling you objects, some sort of finished good for you to purchase individually. If it is a public service, this is somebody that generally works for a government entity of some kind. It could be the federal government, it could be the state government, it could be the county government, city government, you name it. It is some sort of government entity that is employing these people to provide very specific services. So, what we're looking at here is police departments, fire departments, the FBI. We are looking at, on the state level, your entire state government and all the things that they do. The folks that supply food stamps, the guys that work in the weather department to predict the weather over at NOAA. NASA, all of it is considered one big giant public service because they're all government employees doing us the public service of putting people in space. And so that would be another pretty good example. I am one of those people that fits into public service. I work for a school district. And so they pay me to provide you the service of making videos like this so maybe you can pass your test. And so that's the service I am providing as a public servant. That's what I do. The last is business services or corporate services. These are businesses that do services for other corporations or businesses. This could be an accounting firm that does the books for different companies so they don't have to. It could be the cleaning service that goes into a company's office and cleans up every night and hauls the trash out and stuff. That would be a business to business service. They're providing these services to a company rather than an individual. All right, so far so good. Good. The next thing would be things like central place theory. You got to understand central place theory, so you might want to look at that in the chapter again. This is the organization of where services can be found in cities. And so you've got your CBD. This is going to provide things like the business services and a lot of the public services. But you're not going to find as many personal services down there, except for like high-end jewelry stores and maybe that little Subway shop that's at the bottom of some skyscrapers, so the worker bees can go down there and have lunch. So you got to think about where would stuff be in that central area, and then as you move further out, you're going to encounter different kinds of communities of different sizes. And depending on where you're at, will give you some idea of what kind of services you would be offered there. So, for instance, when you move kind of out into the suburbs, you don't see nearly as much of the government services or business service to service. You see a lot more retail services. This is where you're going to have your shopping malls and stuff like that, the small strip centers that have your nail place and your pizza place and stuff like that. So, and the further out you go, the less dense the population around a city tends to be. And so the type of services are going to change. You're not going to see jewelry stores anymore. You're going to see feedlots to feed your animals with and things like that. So the services change as you move further away. And this is that model that kind of looks like some sort of game or something, but it's all made of hexagons. Usually, sometimes you'll see them as circles, but most of the time they're hexagons, and that gives you the idea of how these things relate to each other in a city. So think about how Houston's laid out. And think about the towns that ring the city and what kind of services could you find there. What's the population density like and things like that. And you'll see that central place theory or Christaller theory actually kind of fits all of that. So look over the central place theory stuff, please. Range and threshold are things that you're going to need to know for this. Range is the distance that your citizens are willing to go to get a particular service, and beyond that point, they probably won't go that far. So think about how far would you be willing to go get a pizza? How far are you willing to go to the dentist? How far are you willing to go to get brain surgery? How far would you go to, I don't know, get Martian ice cream? I don't know. But there's a distance that most consumers are willing to go. And that's as far as they're willing to go, and that's your range. And you need to know that if you're in the services market, because you need to know exactly how far are your customers willing to go to get your service, be it whatever it is. Threshold is the minimum number that you need to make that business potentially profitable. How many customers do you need? And I think I told you McDonald's is something like 30 to 50,000 in order to support a McDonald's. A lot of your fast food restaurants, it's about the same number. And so if you are looking at the service sector, you have to, if you're planning on opening a business, consider, do you have the density of clients or customers in that range threshold to support your business? Because if it's too small, doesn't matter how good your business is, you may not have enough people to keep it alive, to keep it going. And so what you're going to do is probably look at something like the gravity model. Where's the densest part of a population that would be considered your clients, your customers? And because the denser that population is, the more likely that you have met that threshold in order to make your business profitable. And so businesses will look at the gravity model to try to locate, depending on who they're trying to market this to, where they should put their businesses. And the fun thing, of course, is that you're not going to be the only one doing that. Other companies are also going to look at the gravity model and say, oh, well, we need to relocate in that same place too. So you tend to see clusters of businesses, very like businesses that come together in an area because they've already determined the gravity model says this is the center of where our client base is. And that ties into hoteling because hoteling tells you that the general what happens with businesses over time is even though they might have started off in two different places, they tend to drift towards the center of their market, because they're trying to get more and more share from a competing business, and they end up sitting right next to each other. And that's why you see that with CVS's and Walgreens. And if you've got a Walmart here, you're probably going to end up with a Target over here. If you have one gas station here, you're going to get another gas station over there, and they'll sit right next to each other. And that's that whole hoteling idea, and the idea of using the gravity model to try to determine where that center point is. All right. Rank size rule. This is actually going into cities, which is what we're talking about now. But this is something that actually applies to services as well. If you're looking at rank size rule, if you look at a country, for reasons that are obscure to me, possibly magical, often in a country, the largest city, whatever size of the largest city it is, the second largest city tends to be about half the size of the first one. And that the third largest city is about half the size of the second one, or a quarter of the size of the first one, and so on going down. It is a weird phenomenon, but it has been observed in many countries. And when you look at that, you have to think about, okay, well, what kind of businesses would locate in all these different sizes of cities? So think about communications companies, transportation companies, big corporate headquarters. Where would they probably put them, and so forth, and how that might change when you look at the sizes of all these different cities. What might you expect to see in all these different sizes of cities? Because again, even in business to business, you're still dealing with the concept of hoteling and the gravity model. Where are your customers? If you're a business to business, let's say, or if you're in public service, where would you probably locate most of your stuff? The answer, of course, is probably in the capital city of whatever state you're looking at. It's probably where they're going to be located because that's where their client base is. All right, almost there. You might want to look at primate cities. A primate city is a city in a country. It is generally the largest, and in fact, it's almost certainly going to end up being the largest city. It is the center of transportation. It's the center of communications. It's going to be the capital. It is going to be the center of industry. It's going to be the center of public works like museums and probably the country's largest zoo. All these things tend to focus on the primate city. And so if you take some examples like France, if you've got Paris, The entire transportation system focuses on Paris. The industry of France tends to focus on Paris. It is where all the central cultural things of France, the big museums are. Government is located in Paris. And so this is definitely a primate. Moscow in the Russian Federation would be another primate. Stockholm in Sweden, Copenhagen in Denmark, Mexico City, for the most part, is often considered a primate city in Mexico. Seoul, South Korea would be another one. But there are countries that don't follow this pattern. We don't, for instance. Our government is based in Washington, D.C., but our communication system is based in New York. Our transportation system hubs on Chicago. A lot of our cultural stuff is parked out in California. So it's scattered. It's scattered in lots of different places. China is the same way. The city of government is Beijing, but industry tends to focus on Shanghai. And so these are two different cities. And when you get more into stuff in China, you're going to find out that it's often located in different cities in the country. So primate city doesn't work for every country, but it works for a lot of them. So it's just something to know. And the difference between offshoring and outsourcing, and why do we do it? If it's offshoring, we're looking at industrial jobs moving overseas, primarily to take advantage of lower labor costs, but also probably to escape environmental laws or labor laws that they're trying to avoid because that costs the company more. And so if you've got a country out there that has got a skilled labor force, you need skilled laborers, but maybe does not have all the environmental laws, environmental protections, worker protections, that sort of thing, and the cost of the labor per hour is much lower, then the chances are you're probably looking at a country that is taking in offshoring work. Probably the best example of this today is China. It's the reason why everything is marked made in China, because that's where the factories are, because lower labor cost, less intensive environmental laws, and things like that. Outsourcing is when service jobs move overseas. And this could be call centers. This could be people analyzing your medical labs and stuff, your x-rays. It could be lots of things that are done primarily through telecommunications. So a lot of your professional jobs can actually be done overseas somewhere, taking advantage of lower professional labor costs. So if I am a doctor's office here and I don't want to waste time looking at x-rays and stuff, I can email that x-ray to a doctor in India who will look at it for me for a fee, come back with an answer and tell me, yep, that leg is broken. So I can tell you, yep, that leg is broken, and then, charge you my doctor's visit. This is something that we see more and more. A lot of architectural firms, software firms have moved overseas, primarily to places like India. One of the things about outsourcing is that it helps immensely if you speak the language of your clients. And one of the big beneficiaries of that right now is India. India has low-cost professional labor, skilled labor, but they also tend to speak English, at least as their primary, if not secondary or tertiary language. And so they can communicate with their clients. So if I am an architect in the United States and I want to build a building in Houston, Texas, I have no real need to hire an American architect. I can hire somebody in India at probably a quarter of the cost. They have the exact same skills, and we can communicate. I can tell you that this is, you can ask me what I want on this building, and they can work it into the design. It's really hard to do that if your person that you're talking to is speaking Mandarin Chinese, because most of us don't. And so having that language connection makes a big deal in outsourcing, where these professional jobs are going overseas. So that's what I want you to concentrate on to retake the test on Friday during Panther Den. If you have any questions, you can email me or ask, maybe in class. I guess we will find out. Anyway, good luck. I am going to have it up on Friday during Panther Dan. You can jump in and take it, and hopefully we will replace that test grade. Good luck.